Good evening. It's 6:30, January the 11th. This is the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes class. Um, Nobody showed up yet, but hopefully here in a few moments they will. Tonight we begin with Proverbs chapter 10 through 12, or actually 10, and see how far we can get along. And in this particular section of the passage, we see a division. In chapter 10, verses or through the 22nd chapter, you have now that big section of the book called the Proverbs of Solomon. It contains over 375 different proverbs. And again, a lot of these proverbs, the sections in this book begins with the phrase, a wise son. Now, chapters 10 through 12 are antithetical in construction. I talked in the very first few classes of the idea that there is antithetical as well as antithetical parallelism and synonymous parallelism. Antithetical parallelism, again, is a reminder from what I said. Half of the verse points to a principle of life of wisdom. The opposite principle is found in the life of folly. So as we think about that in that respect, you're going to see Lady Wisdom and the harlot folly, as it was, and as we've seen in the preceding chapters. We talked about last week that the ideal of a young man going after folly and going after that in that respect could be very well following the ideal of folly as opposed to following the ideal of wisdom. So with that in mind, let's begin with a word of prayer, and then we'll get on into Proverbs chapter 10. Thank you, Father, again for this day and for the blessings you give us. We are grateful to you for your word, and I'm grateful to you for these Proverbs. I've never studied this in this respect, Father, and you know that. And Father, I'm just so appreciative of the fact that the school and those that are wanting to study and to know these things, I pray that we might know the truth, that it might become a big part of our lives every day, that we might seek after wisdom, the wisdom that comes from above, the wisdom that Paul would share and emphasize in the book of 1 Corinthians. I pray, Father, that we might have that wisdom. And I pray more importantly that we would do your will. Keep us in your loving care. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I had some cold issues last week, still got them this week, so please bear with me a little bit. I may have to stop a little bit and take some drink or something like that. So please keep that in mind and just bear with me as I'm trying to work through that at this point in time. Thank you. Okay, as we talked about just a few moments ago, Proverbs chapter 10 begins this section of antithetical parallelism. And again, you have five contrasts that are going to be developed in the Proverbs of this unit. Beginning in chapter 10, verses 1 through 5, he emphasizes these five contrasts. Number one, and let's just start off by reading these. I think it would be good just to look at it from that viewpoint. The Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son. Remember a moment ago I mentioned the idea that this is what sets it off. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. The Lord, he says, will not allow the righteous soul to famish, but he casts away the desire of the wicked. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a wise son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. So you see the antitheticals in this. You start off with this, and then it gives the opposite of it. So let's look again at verse 1. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of the mother. Think about this. The wise and foolish have ethical and again, it's not so much intellectual, but it's more ethical connotations. The mother sees more of the son because she's there with him on a day-by-day basis. The wise father doesn't spend as much time with it. So as it says, a foolish son is the grief of his mother, in the fact that it's causing her more grief. So here you have the antithesis of joy and grief. All right, verse 2, the antithesis of profit and loss. Treasures of wickedness, he says, profits nothing. We remember again going in the first chapter where he emphasized the idea that you don't get in with a gang of thugs, because if you do, it goes the wrong way. If you acquire money in illegal means, you're not going to have any genuine happiness. And those treasures will avail nothing on the day of judgment, because you have to give an account of that in the day of judgment. But righteousness delivers from what? It delivers us from death. What is righteousness? Again, the Hebrew word suggests the ideal of moral goodness in general and charity in particular. And this is the comments from James Smith. So again, these ideas are very, very true. Satisfaction, again, and frustration. Chapter 10 at verse 3. The Lord will not allow the righteous soul to famish, but he casts away the desire of the wicked. And again, soul here could very well mean life. God will provide the necessities of life. Remember what he tells us in Matthew chapter 6, that we need not to be worried about the clothing, the food that we eat, the shelter over our heads. But he does emphasize the idea here, as we look at that together. He does emphasize the idea that the righteous soul will not famish, but he casts away the desire of the wicked, whatever they want. Have you ever thought about the fact that the wicked are never satisfied? There's no real enjoyment for everything they've got. Again, I remember growing up and wanting all the stuff that so many people had. And now, as I'm in a situation where I have this, and I'm growing older, I'm now to the point where that stuff does not appeal to me anymore. So again, the wicked are never satisfied. The closer we draw to God and we really have our life and our fellowship and our relationship with him, that's all that really matters. Then you have chapter 10 at verse 4, industry and indolence. One becomes poor with a slack hand. All right, so the word hand means a ineffective hand or a palm or something like that. Again, the Bible's biblical ethics stress the dignity of work. He emphasizes that ideal over and over again. And Proverbs all through the book will be warning us about the wickedness of laziness and being lazy. So he says, the hand of the diligent, however, brings, again, wealth. So this is braced for vigorous work. And then you have chapter 10 at verse 5, foresight and procrastination. A son that acts prudently, a son who gathers in the summer, is a wise son. So to think about it, he emphasizes the idea of the wise son. Chapter 1 or 10 at verse 1, the wise son makes a glad father. Now you have a wise son who gathers in summer, so he's taking care of what he needs to take care of. But then if you wait till the harvest, is a son who causes shame, because a lot of times, especially in that culture and in that land, what happens is the one who sleeps, as it was, one who snores, the Hebrew word would suggest, is a son that does shamefully. So you see these contrasts. Now, chapter 10, verse 6 through 22, you still see this contrast. The idea of this antithetical idea once again. And here you have the wise and the foolish. And this goes all the way from chapter 6 or chapter 10, verse 6 through 22. So we'll look at each one of them individually as well. You have blessings and cursings. Blessings are on the head of the righteous, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. So again, the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. He waits for the opportunity of practicing violence. And they plot the ruin of their neighbors and thus incur their curses. But once upon the reward of the righteous, God's going to bring about blessings to them. Pleasant memories versus painful memories. Verse 7, he says the memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. So again, after a righteous person dies, there's usually a lot of people in his memorial service are talking about his good deeds. They'll recall his name with respect. But then you have somebody that is wicked and they die. And they're a lot of times, by and large, forgotten. And think about the ideal in this respect. We might name our children after those that are righteous men, Abraham or Jesus is the Spanish, Jesus, things along that line. They'll recall those names, but nobody names their children after Adolf Hitler. Nobody names their children after Judas or Nero or any of these others that have been very wicked. Okay, so you have pleasant memories, painful memories. Now you have the wise in heart will receive commands, but a prating fool will fail. You have humility and arrogance. The wise in heart accepts commandments. He will receive commandments. He's not too proud. He's not conceited. He accepts the divine law with all its direction. It is not above learning from other people. But he who perverts his ways, a prating fool. And a prating fool is literally the foolish of lips. this one shall be thrust down. So a chattering fool, somebody who is engaging constantly in senseless talk. Um, while somebody is chattering, you can't be learning. And so as you think about it in that respect, he says a wise person has a solid heart. And one person says a wise person again, James Smith says he has a solid heart, but a person who is a fool has loose lips. Okay? Security versus insecurity, chapter 10 at verse 9. He who walks with integrity walks securely. So if you're walking in the paths of righteousness, doing what God wants and what God expects, you understand exactly what's going on, and you have nothing to be afraid of. You have nothing to conceal. You're free from dangers, from anxiety, because, again, the Lord is a shield to him. But he says violence covers, he who perverts his ways will become known, verse 9. I skipped down to a couple of places very quickly. So again, he's emphasizing this idea that he who walks uprightly is secure, but he who perverts his ways is what's going to happen. He's going to be known. There's going to be exposed, punished, put to open shame. And so he can't really walk securely. Now, he mentions the fact in chapter 10 at verse 8, the wise in heart will receive commands, but a prating fool, somebody who continues to the foolish of lips shall make his ways known. Now, contrast that again with chapter 10 at verse 10. He who winks with the eye causes trouble, but a prating fool will fall. So here you have the prating fool of verse 8 and the prating fool of verse 10. Now, here, remember we talked about the prating fool of chapter 10, verse 8, is a chattering person who's not learning. Here in chapter 10 at 10 is the idea of a blubbering fool. The idea is that he's not only causing damage to himself, but he's causing damage to others as well. The winking of the eye here is a sign of craft, malice. So this person causes trouble, but again, the prating fool will perish because, again, the damage that's done to others because he's constantly bringing out or saying these foolish, simple, stupid things. The enlivening versus deadly speech. The mouth of the righteous is a well of life. And I really like that phrase, a well of life, a fountain of life, from the English Standard Version. But the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. So again, violence covers the mouth of the wicked, chapter 10 at verse 11. So God himself is the well of life, the fountain of living water. The man of God draws from God as his supply. He sheds life and refreshment around. His words are encouraging words to those who need that exhortation. But the mouth of the wicked is what? Harmful, hypocritical. You never know what their true intent is because they're out there always trying to create problems. So you've got to be careful whenever you're around that in that respect. And then he says this in verse 12. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. How does hatred stir up strife? Because we focus on our faults or the faults of others. We make mountains out of molehills. We question motives. We think we can look into people's hearts. And hatred keeps alive this old feeling of revenge, seeks opportunity for satisfying it. But love, on the other thing, does what? It covers all transgressions. It puts shortcomings out of sight. Again, think about what Brother Peter said in the book of 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8. And again, we ask the question, was he thinking about, at that particular time, this particular proverb? And it's interesting, he says, above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love shall be a cover, or love shall cover all sins. So think about that, how important it is that love should have the part that it needs to have. Verse 13 through 21 talks specifically about the wise and the foolish here. Now, we've seen this, the contrasting outcomes of their life, verses 6 through 12. Now you have verses 13 through 21. They're talking about the wise and the foolish. The foolish is the ones who lack sense. And so see how this is going. Let's just kind of read through it very quickly and get the idea. Wisdom is found on the lips of him who has understanding, but a rod is for the back of him who is devoid of understanding. Wise people store up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. The rich man's wealth is a strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. The labor of the righteous leads to life. The wages of the wicked leads to sin. He who keeps instruction is in the way of life, but he who refuses correction goes astray. Now again, think about this. If it is the case that we are to memorize this, it would make it easy just to kind of remember these contrasts in this respect. All right, verse 18. He who hides hatred has lying lips. Whoever spreads slander is a fool. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver, but the heart of the wicked is worth little. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for lack of wisdom. You hear the contrast as it goes through here. Let's look at this. Verses 13 and 14. What is some contrast about wisdom? Wisdom is found on the lips of him who has understanding, and wise people, what? Store up knowledge. So the man of understanding is discreet in his speech. He's not going to tell everything he hears. He's not going to be caused trouble by rash or foolish words. Have you ever been in a situation where maybe you've said something rashly and wished you hadn't later? I've done that on numerous occasions. And hopefully one of the things I've been learning over the last few years in my own life is the idea that the less said, the better. And sometimes especially when I'm very upset about something, I'll just have a tendency to listen and mutter some words like thank you or something like that and walk away, lest I do say something. Again, young people don't do that a lot of times, and some people really never grow out of that situation. Then you have the contrast. He says, but the rod is for the back of him who is devoid of understanding. Now think about that phrase. He's trying to bring out the ideal here. The wise person is found on the lips of him who has understanding, but the person that does not have understanding is kind of like an animal. You have to force an animal to do something. You have to beat an animal. You have to drive the animal somewhere or another. Again, being raised on a farm and so forth, I remember having to drive some cattle to do some things that I wanted to do, even though they wanted to do something else. Wise men conceal or store up. Wise people store up knowledge. They're not talkative. They're not trying to tell everything they know. They lay up knowledge like a treasure for use on the proper occasions. They're just trying to be making sure that they're saying what's right. But again, the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. The fool does not weigh his words. He blurts out statements that winds up having to come back and bite him somewhere down the line. And you know what I mean, again, exactly in that respect. Think about the ideal of wealth, verse 15 and 16. The rich man's wealth is a strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. His protection against many troubles in life is his wealth. Hey, how you doing? Glad to see you this evening. Good. Wealth is not for evil in itself. It has distinct advantages, but the ruin of the poor is their poverty. So let's stop there for just a moment and get everybody on in here and back to that idea. We're now in chapter 10, verse 13 through 21, where you have, again, these contrasts as he continues to go through all of this. The one who lacks sense and the one who doesn't as you go through this. Verse 13, 14. Wisdom is on the lips of the man who has understanding. So, okay. And then he says, wise people store up knowledge, verse 13 and 14. So wise people are doing what? There's a person that has understanding and they're storing up knowledge. But what happens on the other side? What's the contrast? A rod is for the back of him who is devoid of understanding. I think of the rod here. We think of, of course, obviously we think of the ideal of beating, right? And here I think he's trying to say, okay, the wise person has understanding, but those that are not wise, that are foolish, they're like animals. They have to be driven to do what they have to do. And again, growing up on a farm, and I mentioned this very quickly, was the idea that there were times when there were some cows and so forth, I had to get a stick after and try to get them to do what I wanted them to do because they were going to do it some other way. And the reality is that's just the way it is. Wise people store up knowledge, but what? The mouth of the foolish is near destruction. They lay knowledge like a treasure, and then the bottom line is they're not weighing their words, and they're doing considerable harm to themselves or to somebody else. Look at 15 and 16. The rich man's wealth is a strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty, and that's where about y'all came in, so that's just kind of getting that up. So the labor of the righteous leads to life, but the wages of the wicked to sin. Okay, let's see the contrast. The rich man's wealth is a strong city. Wealth is not evil in itself. Abraham was a very wealthy man. Job was a wealthy man. And we see that over and over again. But as we're looking at it, you think about the destruction of the poor, there's nothing desirable about being poor. I mean, it's just problems which suggest weakness. It suggests the ideal of an inability to help oneself. And there are some people that are in that situation that they seemingly can't do anything better. But now, look again, think about this. He says, the labor of the righteous leads to life. Again, earnings from honest toil. You provide for the necessities of life for your family, but the increase of the wicked is for sin. Money used dishonestly or gained dishonestly is squandered in vice. Think about the whole ideal of gambling and people getting involved and sucked into gambling. They gain it dishonestly and they lose it. And then they wind up sometimes losing their lives as a result of that. 17 and 18. Again, the idea of witness. All right. He who keeps instruction is in the way of life. He who refuses correction goes astray. Whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. So again, to the one who submits to personal discipline, they're growing and they're becoming what they need to be. But the one who forsakes reproof does what? They're a bad influence on everybody else, right? They're going astray and they're leading everybody else that follows them astray. So he who hides hatred has lying lips. So the one who professes a friendship, but he's not really your friend, that's a lying lips, right? And whoever spreads slander is a fool. What is that? The fool is you're saying something about a person in the wrong way. And that's why he will go on in verse 19 and bring out the idea in 20 and 21. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lip is wise. Now, as we've talked through this, he's talked about the fool. He's talked about the person who, he's talked about the person that covers violence with his mouth, verse 11. He talks about the person that the mouth of the foolish is near destruction, verse 14. Again, he who refuses instruction shall go astray, verse 17. Whoever spreads slander is a fool. You see over and over again, you have this idea of the mouth being used in ways that shouldn't be used. And so he says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. So the more one talks, the more one has the greater risk of saying what is inappropriate. And what did Jesus remind us of in Matthew chapter 12? Every idle word that men shall speak, they will give an account thereof in the day of judgment. So isn't that interesting in that respect? The more we talk, sometimes we're bragging, we're exaggerating, we're not truthful, we're slander, we're uncharitable, we say things we shouldn't say, and there it is. But on the other hand, what do you have? He who restrains his lips is wise. The tongue of the righteous is choice silver. The lips of the righteous feed many. You see, the tongue in these situations is being used for good. The tongue of the righteous feeds many. Some people actually look at this. Some commentators suggest the idea that this could be talking about a man praying, using his prayers to help somebody else. So God sends his abundance to earth, which satisfies the need of many because the prayers of the righteous are praying for that. But again, it could have reference to prayer, but it could also have reference to what? Just the teaching he's giving, right? And that provides nourishment. So again, but the foolish die for what? The lack of understanding. Now, interesting about this is we're looking at this. Verse 12 is kind of a pivotal verse in this chapter. Verse 22 is kind of a pivotal verse. And that's why in my Bible, in the New King James Version, it's set apart. You kind of have these things a little bit set apart in this situation. Why? I think these are key verses. Key verses in this idea is the ideal of hatred stirs up strife, And then verse 22, the blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow with it.
Now, you know, that verse right there, the denomination people take that and run with it.
Which one?
22.
Right. That's right. They would. That's exactly right. Now, again, as we've looked in this, we have seen the wealthy, we've seen the rich, we've seen the things that he says good about it. But what's really the greatest thing about this? It's the knowledge of God, the wisdom God gives. It's not so much the dollars and the cents and the prosperity and all that. It's all the blessing of the Lord that he's talked about earlier. For example, the wise in heart, verse 8, will receive commands. He who walks with integrity walks securely. Again, that's because they are following what? They're following God's will. They're following God's way. Wise people store up knowledge. You know, a lot of people will say, well, now the blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and you're right, but think about what the blessings he's been talking about in this context are. It's wisdom, it's understanding, it's knowledge that you grow because you've lived, and knowledge because you have helped others, keeping instruction, walking in that instruction, living by what he said. That's really the blessings of the Lord. I laugh sometimes at these. I see this on some of the stuff, this Peter Popoff Ministries, where he says, if you call and I'll send you some of this special water, and it's free. It's free. And I said, okay, wonder what he's wanting afterwards. I never do take it from that. But he says, and you can claim your miracle because you pray with this water. And I'm just like, and they have 2 or 3 people saying, well, I got $22,000 check the next day. You know, and all this other stuff going on. Okay, all right. And I keep wondering how much they pay them to say that. That's just, you know what I'm trying to say. You got your $22,000 check because you just said it on national television. So now you're good. All right.
I remember when I was in denomination, they talk about laying hands.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little younger. I wanted to play basketball. So I laid my hands on my knees. And it didn't get better.
Okay, there you go. And again, so much of that is along that line. People are trying to emphasize that so much, right? Yeah. There you go. There you go. And of course, they just said you just didn't have enough faith.
Right.
That's exactly right. That's right. Now, the last part of this chapter, chapter 10, verse 23 through 32, is the righteous and the wicked. Now, let's look at their fates, okay? Let's look at their fates. Now, look at this. As I said, verse 22 is pivotal. Verse 12 is pivotal. To do evil is like sport to a fool, but a man of understanding has wisdom. The fear of the wicked will come upon him, and the desire of the righteous will be granted. When the whirlwind passes by, the wicked is no more, but the righteous has an everlasting foundation. As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy man to those who send him. The fear of the Lord prolongs days, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. The hope of the righteous will be gladness, but the expectation of the wicked will perish. The way of the Lord is strength, but destruction will come to the workers of iniquity. You hear the contrast all through here. And again, this was a mnemonic devised in an effort to get people to remember these things. The righteous will never be removed, but the wicked will not inhabit the earth. The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked is what not is perverse. So again, think about some of the things that he's saying here. First off, the wicked sin very lightly. You know, it's to do evil is like sport to a fool. He finds amusement and satisfaction in everything that's wrong. He allows him to enjoy sin. His conscience doesn't bother him. But for the man of understanding, he has wisdom, right? Okay. All righty. This did this the other Tuesday night. I don't know what it is. It got in here and got so hot you couldn't stand it. And then all of a sudden it just, so anyway. All right. The fear of the wicked, that's their worry, will come upon him. Well, you know, lightly think about their evil practices, but he also knows in the back of his mind that someday judgment's coming, right? And so that's the fear of the wicked, that the judgment's going to come. What do the righteous have to be worried about? Nothing really. Because why? They're doing what God wants and what God expects. And that's so vivid and so true in this respect. The righteous only is living in God's will, and God is going to grant what his desires are. Verse 25, the wicked will be destroyed completely. When the whirlwind passes by, the whirlwind could have the idea of a tornado. I mean, I'm also think about, again, Jesus' statement in Matthew 7:24, and the foolish man built his house upon the sand. And when the winds came and the winds blew, the storm came and the winds blew, as the little children always say, they always love to clap their hands, that the foolish man's house went splat. There you go. Well, there it is here. He's emphasizing that they're totally what? They're blown away. But the righteous has what? An everlasting foundation.
When you look at all this, you can't hide. You're either doing right or wrong. You're either speaking right or wrong. You're either in God's will or you're not in God's will.
That's right.
And the thing about it, your speech and your action will show.
That's right.
So you can be on denial all you want.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's right there.
It's right there in black and white. That's right. That's right. Verse 26, as vinegar to the teeth, smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy man who's sinning. The ideal is vinegar causes irritation to the teeth, smoke causes irritation to the eyes. If you entrust something important to somebody that's lazy, it's not going to get done, right? Mm-hmm. And then look at the positive aspects. All right, we've looked at the verses 23, 24, 25, and 26. Has talked about what happens to the wicked, and it starts off, to do evil is like sport to the fool, the fear of the wicked. Now from 27 through 32, look at the righteous. It starts off with the righteous now and talks about what's going to happen. The fear of the Lord prolongs days. So there you have the beginning of knowledge. And the fear of the Lord, remember chapter 1 at verse 7? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. We remember that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So the promise of a long life is often found in this book, where, again, as long as you what? Fearing the Lord. You have that healthy respect for the Lord and his word. But the years of the wicked will be shortened. Why? Disease, death, retribution, all the things that come and tie in with all of that. The hope of the righteous will be gladness. They will find their hope realized. And the greatest hope for the righteous is what? Heaven itself, right? And that's what it will be looked. And so those who are eagerly hoping for that, it will happen. But what? The expectation of the wicked will perish. What do you think their expectation would be? Something in this life. And again, that's it. The righteous have a glorious refuge. The way of the Lord is strength for the upright, and the righteous will never be removed. Verse 29 and 30. Okay? So he's a stronghold there. Whenever you're walking in the way of God, God is helping map out your life, and we have the courage to face the difficulties that we will have in this life. Right? We've got somebody to walk with us. But think about it in this respect, going back again to 29, destruction will come to workers of iniquity, and the wicked will not inhabit the earth. Now again, I'm thinking about the idea of the meek shall inherit the earth, Matthew chapter 5. But here's the idea that the wicked person will not inhabit the earth. They will not enjoy these things. So the righteous will never be moved, and they've got they've got God on their side. Think about the idea that the children of Israel had been warned on numerous occasions that as long as they stayed faithful to the Lord, they would receive all the blessings that he promised them. But when they refused to do so, then everything that God said would happen to them because they were wicked did happen. Is that not the case? And again, we think about the passages such as Leviticus chapter 26. We think about the passage such as Deuteronomy chapter 28. Where in both of those situations, they give that warning. So finally, the last thing that we have, verse 31 and 32, is the idea the mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable. So they're always bringing forth wisdom as a tree brings forth flowers and fruit. It has a positive influence on others, but what's happening? Well, the perverse tongue will be cut out. You cut off dead limbs off trees. Because to build the health of the tree. So that's it. The mouth of the wicked is perverse. So again, they're not speaking that which is proper. You don't need to be listening to them. So again, excuse me, in chapter 10, this is just a deal of contrast. And again, we have the same thing going on in chapter 11. The treacherous and the blameless. Contrasts. Again, these first 11 verses of chapter 11 are very closely related. And again, in my Bible, you have this brought together. Somebody read that, or chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. Let me wet my whistle a little bit, brother.
Okay. A false balance is abomination to the Lord, but a just way is his delight. When pride cometh, then comes shame, but with the lowly is wisdom. The integrity of the upright shall guide them, but the perverseness of the transgressor shall destroy them. Riches profit not, and the day of wrath, but righteousness delivered from death. The righteousness of the perfect shall direct his way, but the wicked shall fall by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright shall deliver them, but the transgressors shall be taken in their own naughtiness. When a wicked man dies, his expectation shall perish, and the hope of unjust men perisheth. The righteous is delivered out of trouble, and the wicked cometh in his stead. His mouth is his neighbor, but through knowledge shall the just be delivered. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there is shouting. By the blessing of the upright, the city is exalted, but is overthrown by the mouth of the wicked.
Okay. Let's look at some of the contrast. If you look at verse 1, what contrast do you see?
False balance versus a just weight.
Right. Honesty versus dishonesty. Right? Honesty versus dishonesty. Again, Leviticus 19:35, Deuteronomy 25, verse 1 brings out the idea a perfect weight is his delight, his approval. Stones a lot of times were used at that time as the weight of measure and so forth. So honesty and integrity are the foundations of the social duties, and it teaches by wisdom. Okay. What do you find in verse 2? What's the contrast there? You have honesty versus dishonesty in chapter 11, verse 1. What do you think of the next one? When pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom. Humility and versus pride, again. So again, we see the contrast there. And again, this ideal is brought out. With the lowly is wisdom. The lowly are those who do what? They walk humbly with God. Micah chapter 6 verse 8. So wisdom leaves the haughty and lodges in the humble mind. Then what do you see in verse 3, the contrast? The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity. So you have integrity and perversity, right?
Trust.
Huh?
Would that be trust?
Integrity? Integrity is the man that walks according to the truth. Perversity is what? Yeah, it is a negative. You're right there in that respect. Perverseness is something that you're just going to go against something. You're going to be perverting against it. You're going to fight it with everything you have. And again, what is the perverseness here of the unfaithful? Okay, a person that is walking in integrity is faithful. A person that is walking in perversity is unfaithful. Okay, they're not going to do that. And their perversity, because of their unfaithfulness, that is going to ultimately destroy them. All righty. What do you think verses 4?
I would contrast between spiritual and material.
Okay. And the contrast that brought out here possibly could be riches versus or liberality versus selfishness. The way you use your riches, right? Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. It's the idea that, in a time of calamity, unless you're extremely wealthy, and I think of a few cases where the extremely wealthy still were not able to get out of trouble, right? But I think about the O.J. Simpson trial, whenever, that whole murder trial. If it were me, I couldn't have hired that expensive attorney. You know what I'm saying? They'd have thrown me under the jail and threw away the key. You know what I'm trying to say? But at the end of it all, what winds up happening, he still winds up in jail for something totally different. And again, all of his wealth was gone because Johnny Cochran got it all. Think about it in that respect. So it's not going to help in the day of wrath. But if we're, liberality, if we're trying to help others, that will make a difference. And again, is it not emphasizing that we need to always be looking out to try to help people in every way we can? I think so. Look in verses 5-8. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way, but the wicked will fall. The righteousness of the upright will deliver him, but the unfaithful will be caught by their lust. When a wicked man dies, his expectations will perish, and the hope of the unjust perishes. The righteous is delivered from trouble. So here you have righteousness versus wickedness in these 3 verses, right? 4 verses. What does righteousness do in verse 5?
Oh, direct the path.
Right. What does righteousness do in verse 6?
Delivers.
Right. What does the righteous do in verse 7? 8. Delivered from trouble. So you see, righteousness will direct your path. It will deliver you from the problems, and what? It will deliver you from trouble. Now let's draw the contrast with a wicked man. Verse 5. The wicked will do what? Fall by his own wickedness. The unfaithful will be caught by what? Their own lust. The wicked man of verse 7 dies, his expectation will perish, and the hope of the unjust perishes. Now, what's interesting about this is you find these contrasts in verse 5, 6, but we come to 7, verse 7 just what? It just seems like it's elaborating on what's going to happen to the wicked, right? So it's more than just this contrast up to that point in time. It's now said, now this is what else is going to happen to the wicked. Why do you think that would be necessary to emphasize that idea?
Verse 7?
Right. Why does he want to really emphasize what's going to happen to the wicked man?
Well, in verse 7, it's basically that's what's showing you what the end thereof is.
Right.
If you continue down this path, it says when
right.
the wicked man died, his expectation perish, the unjust man perish. So keep on going down that path. Your expectations, well, there are no expectations down there.
That's right. So what is he finally saying in verse 8? The righteous is delivered from trouble, but the trouble comes to the wicked instead. So, again, think about as you're trying to teach this to your son or to those that you really want to listen to or want you to listen to them. These are very short. And again, we got to remember that when the Hebrew were writing this, these were probably 4 or 5 words in these sentences. While we have to gather a little bit more because we're reading from the English, think about that idea. The point is exactly what we've been saying all along. It pays to be righteous, right? It pays spiritually. It pays eternally. We all know that. And it pays because it keeps us out of trouble. We're not going to be engaged in this trouble all the time. I'm not going to be stopped all the time by the police because I'm speeding too much. I'm not going to be stopped by I'm not going to be worried about, I can walk securely in my life without worrying about people coming after me because I've done something wrong. I haven't done anything wrong, So now again, that's the way it should be. Sometimes in real life, it don't always work that way, does it?
Yeah, but what they say, that is faith, you know?
Mm-hmm.
One time I tried to tell my son that don't go looking for trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So I explained to him that if you put yourself in the atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
then whatever comes to that atmosphere or that environment, because you place yourself in, now you don't have to be a part of it, but
Mm-hmm.
because you place yourself in the environment, and those guys that go on X, Y, Z in the environment, because you decide to associate yourself with them, doesn't matter what they're doing, what they're doing, whatever comes to them is going to come to you.
That's right.
So on the other hand, there's things of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But when you put yourself in the environment,
You're gonna
whatever
wind up.
comes
That's
will
right.
come to you too.
That's exactly right. And that's the point. That's the point he's trying to make through all of this. All right. Chapter 11, verse 21 through, chapter 11, verse 12 through 21. Now, we've seen these different contrasts in what? Humility versus pride, honesty versus dishonesty, righteousness versus wickedness. We've seen integrity versus slander, blessing and cursing, all the way through here as we've continued to look through this. Now, we come down to different characters. He who is devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his peace. So here you have a person in verse 12. He who despises his neighbor is what? Or devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor. He lacks understanding. He shows an open contempt for a neighbor. He's acting foolishly. He's making an enemy out of somebody that he shouldn't be making an enemy out of. But a man of discernment, a man of understanding does what? Holds his peace. Pick your battles, right? There's some things that needs to be done, and then there's other things that doesn't need to be done. And especially when you've got somebody living close to you, you don't want to despise your neighbor, but you don't want to create a problem with your neighbor, right? So that's the contemptuous versus the considerate. Verse 13, a talebearer does what? But he who is a faithful spirit does what? Do what?
I'm not going to tell.
That's right. I'm not going to tell what's going to happen in that respect. Because I'm being faithful. Think about, again, some of the things that was condemned in the Old Testament as well as the New: chattering, gossiping, slandering, Leviticus 19:16. You can't trust them with anything. You don't tell them anything, right? Because why? If you want it to get out, that's what you need to do. Tell the person that's going to go blab, right? But a faithful spirit is a right disposition. He's looking out for the welfare of the neighbors. He's able to keep confidence. Even when the knowledge comes to him by accident, he's able to keep confidence. Okay? All right? So again, this person is in that respect. Where there is no counsel, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Where there is no wise direction, a people falls. Again, so you've got to have, a nation needs wise counselors to guide those who run the ship, right? So again, sometimes that's scary, right? So now, what would be a proverb that we say like this in English? Two heads are better than one.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. At least we've got people working together toward what? Toward that end, toward that means. He who is surety for a stranger, and again, what we talked about, what surety was a guaranteeing, a pledge. It literally, the word is striking hands, shaking hands. He who is surety for a stranger will suffer, but he who hates being surety is secure. In other words, putting up your wealth for the collateral for someone else's loan is discouraged. Too often that results in financial harm, right? Especially for somebody that you don't know. Don't do it. Stay away from it. The Bible says stay away from it. Now, at the same time, it's the ideal of what? He who refuses to strike hands or shake on it, He's not worried by burden or liability that he's not going to have the money, to pay it if something goes wrong. All right. A gracious woman retains honor, but ruthless men retain riches. The quiet, beautiful character of a woman that's honored by family and community because she's why? She's gracious. She's retaining that honor. But ruthless men, they're gaining what? Riches that aren't going to help them. We've already seen how the riches aren't going to help at all, are they? The sympathetic versus the cruel. A merciful man does good for his own soul, but he who is cruel troubles his own flesh. A kind person benefits himself, right? And really, you think about it, you're showing acts of benevolence, you're being a blessing to others, you're helping others. But again, if you're just cruel all the time, then what? You're troubling yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that it's right around this time as we're talking about this. We just got through the Christmas season, and how many times that maybe have you heard the Christmas story or the Christmas by Charles Dickens with Scrooge, and think about the man that he was as compared to the man that he became. And again, that's so true, and how everybody just said, and what a story. It's a beautiful story in that respect.
If you're miserable all the time, you can't be happy.
No. And you're going to make everybody else around you miserable.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to want to be around you. And then you're going to be upset because nobody wants to be around you. And so then it's going to create more misery. Mm-hmm. It's just something that is a never-ending thing, is it? All righty. The wicked versus the righteous, verse 18 and 19. The wicked man does deceptive work, but he who sows righteousness will have a sure reward. As righteousness leads to life, so he pursues evil, pursues it to his own what? To his own death. That's right. A wicked man earns deceptive wages because he does deceptive work. And deceptive wages are going to be gone. But if you sow righteousness, you shall receive something that is a true reward. Living in such a way to where the result is holiness. Okay? True righteousness is to life. Now, notice that. As righteousness leads to life. Now, this is something that's brought out over and over and over again. Genuine righteousness has the promise of life. Righteous people supposedly should live longer. Now, but even if it's not in that respect, it's life because we know that we're going to have eternal life with our Heavenly Father, right? So there's that beautiful part of it. But he who pursues evil is what? He's going to death. All right? Those who are of a perverse heart are an abomination to the Lord, but the blameless are in their ways his delight. Though they join forces, the wicked will not go unpunished, but the posterity of the righteous will be delivered. So you hear the righteous leads to life. The blameless in their ways are God's delight. The prosperity of the righteous will be delivered. But what about the wicked? You're pursuing your own death. You're an abomination to the Lord. You can join forces with other people, but you will still be punished. So true. And again, as I've said in the very beginning of class, Thomas Campbell demanded that his children memorize the book of Proverbs. What would happen today if we tried to encourage that same thing in our children today? All right. Now, what are some things that are not good? Unbecoming attributes. Chapter 11, verse 22. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so a lovely woman who lacks discretion. Okay. I remember years ago, again, working on a farm, I'd put a ring in a pig's nose. And the ring would be something that you'd put in there. And the main reason why you did that is because if you didn't do it, they would root up under a fence and get out. They'd actually dig the dirt out from under the fence and slide up under to get out. So you actually put it on there. But here he's talking about a ring of gold, precious metal on a pig's nose. And that's a woman who lacks discretion. Wow. Okay. All right. Now, a nose ring was a very common adornment of the women in that period. We remember that idea that they would take out their nose rings in the book of Exodus and so forth and use that. But, this is a beautiful piece of jewelry. That would be used for a pig? Wow. All righty. So that, a lovely woman, a pretty woman who lacks discretion. And the word discretion is the word taste. That's how he describes it. All right. The desire of a wicked man. The desire of the righteous is only good, but the expectation of the wicked is wrath. All right. Those who are desiring what is proper receive for themselves the good, the favor of the Lord. But the expectation, all they can look forward to is what? Of the wicked? God's anger. God's anger. All right. There is one who scatters, yet increases more. There is one who withholds but more than is right, but it leads to poverty. The generous soul will be made rich. He who waters will also be watered himself. The people will curse him who withholds grain, and blessings will be on the head of those who sell it. So again, you have a stingy person that has the ability to help others, but they're not willing to do so. And then you have the person that is what? That he's scattering. That's the idea there. It's the idea of sowing the seed. He's giving out more. He's giving more than he can really take in. And think about the ideal in this respect. The miser only loses what he hoards, right? Scrooge was going to die, and Marley died, going back to that story. Marley died, and he had to carry around all those riches, remember? And it was worthless. He just loses it. But the generous person shall be made rich because why? He's helping those that are in need. He's using his money for the purpose God intended. He's helping others all the time. His reward is a metaphor from agriculture. He who scatters yet increases more. It's the idea, you spread a few seeds and you get that many more seeds. You're able to feed your family and so forth. So he said the people will curse him who withhold grain. Think about, again, in a time of scarcity, when there's no food, then people curse the person who has the food that's not willing to give it away. Right? And again, it's against justice, it's against charity. But a blessing will be upon the head of those who sell it. So you try not to gain profit from the emergency. God blesses you in abundance. Now, the next few verses, 27 through 29, kind of talks about, again, the misuse of wealth. He who earnestly seeks good finds favor, but trouble will seek him who seeks evil. He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage. He who troubles his own house will inherit the wind, and the fool will be a servant to the wise of heart. So, when you trust in riches, you're obscuring something that is good for yourself. He who earnestly seeks good finds favor, but trouble will come to him who seeks evil. It's the idea that, if you're trying to help others to be happy and to have what they need, you're going to be blessed. But if you keep it by yourself, then what? It's going to come back on you. Trouble will come to those who seek evil. It's the idea that it's just like I said a moment ago. As he said earlier in verse 26, the people will curse him who withhold grain. If you trust in your riches, you will fall. Again, Paul will tell the young preacher Timothy, do not seek to be rich, because the love of money, not money itself, but the love of money will what? Leads to evil, right? 1 Timothy 6, verse 7. And I've always, whenever I was taught that, and whenever I went to college, I was always taught that, this one preacher was saying, preachers don't get into business to become rich. In fact, Paul warns Timothy, don't do it. And he tells Timothy how to teach the rich in the congregation in Ephesus, what they need to be doing with their riches. All right? Riches can't save a bad man from the consequences of his evil deeds. Okay, and if it looks like he's going to get away with it here, he's also got to face what? God's wrath. God's wrath. All right? The righteous are those who have a godly perspective on wealth. So you have all of this kind, and then trust in riches results in greed. He who troubles his own house will inherit the wind. So if you're just trusting in your riches and what you've got, then what? The breadwinner is miserly. He denies his dependence to the necessity of life. He troubles his family through ill temper and bad management, household servants. So what's he going to get? He's worthless. It's like wind blowing stuff away. All right? It's gone. So what's the conclusion? 2 Proverbs. All right? The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and he who wins souls is wise. Right? The life of the one who lives by the principles of wisdom has a positive effect of everybody around him. But then he says, if the righteous will be recompensed on the earth, how much more the ungodly and the sinner? All right, if God is going to what? Bless the fruit of the righteous, what's he going to do to the ungodly and sinner? He's not going to overlook that, is he? He will punish that. And so we need to do what we can. And again, we quote this verse, in that idea where, again, he who wins souls is wise, is the idea of brings them back to sense, brings them back to their senses, and helps them to grow and be what God wants and what God expects of them to be. All right, let's take about a 5-minute break, and we'll pick back up here with chapter 12, verse 1. All righty. Let me go get me some water. I will pause this for just a moment. That's all I got to say. All right, chapter 12. Try to see how much farther we can get. This particular chapter, again, some people think that this particular chapter may have been a collection that, again, was brought into the book a little bit later on. And it starts off with the idea of what? Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. So it could be that if a person is truly trying to be what God wants them to be, they need to be willing to listen to correction. They need to be willing to listen to criticism of their conduct. But he who is stupid, what? He who hates reproof is unwise. So those that are not wise, they reject correction. So it's somebody like a beast, again, insensible to higher aspirations or ambitions. So he just goes through that, and that's it. So as I said, this may be something that's just was circulating around, but remember Solomon and all this was brought together by these editors when we talked about the book earlier, remember? So it could have been in that respect, but it's still obviously from Solomon because it fits into that category. All right, again, we see these contrasts. A good man obtains favor from the Lord, but a man of wicked intentions, he will condemn. So again, in respect from God, what's important? A man is not established by wickedness, but the root of the righteous cannot be moved. So a good man is going to obtain favor from the Lord, and he can't be moved. But a man of wicked intentions, he will condemn, and he's not established. So things are going to be bad to him. Again, it's a situation where it's maybe I should have quit. But anyway, the idea that wicked person has no real firm hold on life. There's no growth for life, but the root of the righteous shall never be moved, right?
You can't tell them that, the wicked.
That's right, you can. And again, it goes back to the idea of whoever hates correction is what? Is stupid in the fact that it's somebody, again, like a beast. You can't get them to do anything otherwise. All right? An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who causes shame is like rottenness in his bones. Again, a wife of strong character is applied to one either powerful in mind or body. Again, it's the idea of such a wife as an honor to her husband. She honors, beautifies his life. And she adds to the social status of him in the community. But she who does shamefully is rottenness. Okay, just, those that aren't acting the way they need to, it just wears him down. It causes his heart to be just what? She poisons her husband's life, you might say, right? All right, verse 5. The thoughts of the righteous are right, but the counsels of the wicked are deceived. Thoughts. Thoughts are so important, right?
Yeah.
If we're trying to live a righteous life, we're going to be thinking righteous thoughts about doing what's good. But again, the counsels of the wicked are deceitful in the fact that they're what? They're coming up with crooked methods for everything.
It's like, I hear what you say, but I don't see it.
Mm-hmm. That's right. The words of the wicked are lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright will deliver them. The words of the wicked are bloody ambush, is another way to put it. They're plotting, conspiring together, plotting murder. Remember chapter 1 at verse 11. Again, we're going to strike the defenseless down. But the mouth of the upright will deliver them. They will deliver the victims of the conspirators. They have an opportunity to warn them about them. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous will stand. All right? They cease to exist. The wicked cease to exist in their powerful positions. But again, the house of the righteous will stand, and that's what he's emphasizing there. Verses 8 through 12. Examples. All right? You see, again, as we look through this, a lot of times we see all these verses as just disconnected. But you see, there's a lot more connection to these verses than what we're seeing. And you see the contrast and so forth is how he's trying to do this. So, again, a lot of times we don't see the connection and we lose out as a result, right? Now, here in verses 8 through 12, you're going to see some different kinds of men. For example, chapter 12, verse 8, the prudent person. Chapter 12, verse 9, the self-sufficient person. Chapter 12, verse 10 is the merciful person. And chapter 12, verse 11 is the what? The diligent person. All right. Chapter 12, verse 12. The fruitful, righteous person. Okay. So all of these things come in together. All right. A man will be commended according to his wisdom, but he who is of a perverse heart will be despised. So the prudent person is known for his common sense, his sound judgment, his intellect, and again, he has a practical wisdom in his life and character. They all honor him. They all praise him for the kind of person that he is. But again, he who is of a perverse heart shall be what? Despised. They make bad decisions. They judge unfairly. They have no sympathy for others. So they're going to be despised by everybody. Better is the one who is slighted but has a servant than he who honors himself but lacks bread. The self-sufficient person, again, a man who performs the humble task of a servant in order to have money to pay for his necessities of life and his family. But the second person is what? He's honoring himself and going hungry, right? Sometimes in life, we need to understand that, no job is too mean. Sweeping floors, vacuuming the floors, sweeping, mopping, that's not a bad job.
I remember in high school when I said, I ain't never going to wash nobody's dishes.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes the senior year, I need the money by the year above, graduate, do some things.
Mm-hmm.
My mom ain't had it. So you know what I did?
Started washing the dishes. That's right. So again, this goes back to another thing. Don't say what you won't do, right? Because you'll wind up doing it somewhere down the line.
Well, I got a proverb parable for you. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
That's right. That's right. The merciful person, he regards the life of his animal, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. All right. He's going to regard the life of his beast. He's paying attention to his animal's needs. And again, this is in an agrarian society where he's going to depend upon his ox or depend upon his mule or whatever kind of animal he's got to what? Plow his fields and help harvest the fields and all that other stuff. So he's got to take care of his animal. Mm-hmm. If we're putting that in 21st century America, a prudent person is going to take care of his vehicles, right? Yeah. How he gets around, whatever he's got to do to get around, he's going to take care of that. Again, in the East, there was this sense that animals were not only the slaves of man, but the creatures of God. And again, how a person treats an animal is an index to a person's character, right? So we need to be thinking about that. If one is merciful to beast, then are you going to be merciful to your spouse and your children? Absolutely. But if you're not, then it's going to show up. And again, they will talk a lot of times. You listen to these people talking about crimes, and they will talk about how a lot of times little children will be mean to an animal somehow or another. And they grow up and they start being very vicious to people. It's just one step away. So again, that merciful person is there. A wicked man does not know the first thing about kindness. He's concerned about all that he wants and what himself. That's it. He who tills his own land will be satisfied with bread, but he who follows frivolity, and the word frivolity there in verse 11 comes from a word means vain things, is devoid of understanding or devoid of heart, literally. All right. So the diligent person, a person that is, again, following hard work. And again, think about how this is sent over and over again. If you do that, then you will be satisfied. But if you're just following after vain things, you're vain of heart. The wicked covet the catch of evil men, but the fruit of the righteous yields fruit. So the wicked man is what? He's coveting. What is that? Yeah, coveting. Covetous. What is covetous?
Greed, or it could be greed or unlawful gain.
Right.
You know, and just like gambling, for example.
Mm-hmm. Another word is envy. Envious.
Oh yeah, that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, you envy what another has, and so as a result of that, and that's what he's doing here. The wicked man is desiring the stronghold of evil men. In other words, he wants what he thinks is going to give him security, and that's ill-gotten gain. But he gets small return for his labor. But the righteous gain all they want because of why? They have high principles. They're striving to live by what they need to. The root of the righteous yields fruit. So again, the speech, listen to their speech. And he's going to go through a lot of this beginning in verse 13 and 14 all the way through 15 through 26, wise and foolish speech. Okay. This wicked is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous will come through trouble. A man will be satisfied with the good by the fruit of his mouth, and the recompense of a man's hands will be rendered to him. So again, you have this ideal of what? How often our lips get us into trouble. And especially with the wicked person, right? The righteous will come through trouble. So we've all heard the story that when you tell the first lie, you've got to tell another lie to cover that lie. And it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse, right? Mm-hmm. You make promises that you don't keep. Then after a while, people start saying what? He can't be trusted, yep. Right? Our mouth gets us into more trouble than we really realize, right?
You have a person who doesn't lie a lot, tell a lie, and by nature, they tell the truth, then they told them themselves, or they told the lie.
Right. And nobody, if they do tell the truth, nobody believes them because they've been living that whole situation. All right. So again, the transgressions of the wicked is ensnared by the transgression of his lips. He escapes out of trouble. The righteous person is never going to offend. He's never going to tell a lie. He can be counted on for that. Now, again, sometimes I promise too much. Sometimes we think we can do more than we think we can. And we wind up what? Not being able to carry out every promise that we make. Mm-hmm. So perhaps we need to learn something from there as well. In the fact, don't make so many promises. Say no more often. That's tough, isn't it? Because we want to help everybody we can and to be involved in much as we can. And the bottom line is we a lot of times have trouble saying no. Well, and you see, again, as I'm growing older, I'm beginning to learn this one myself. I mean, you think I'm the preacher, I'm an elder, I visit, trying to visit everybody. I teach here at the Georgia School of Preaching. I try to direct the campus. And then I've been trying to direct a week of Bible camp and trying to get people together for that. And somebody comes up, well, I need you to do this. Okay. I'd be happy to do it. It's good work. Something needs to be done. But what's begun to happen over the last couple of years is I've come to the realization that I can't do all this. There comes a point where you've got to say, it's time to let somebody else do some of this stuff. Serving as an elder, I want to get in there and paint the building or whatever it is. And look at it this way. I want to do it because I want to be an example, but at the same time, while painting the building is important, reaching out to a lost soul is more important. And both are good works. Both are needed works. But what is going to have the more eternal benefit? That's the question. If my extent of Bible camp is making sure all the kids are happy, happy, joy, joy, but they're not getting any spiritual growth out of it, again, is that the best way to handle it? So it's some of those things that, and again, as I was reading through this and meditating upon this myself, I was thinking about, okay, how often are we not willing to say no, and then we don't keep the promises that we make? And in the long run, then we what? We're losing even that much more of our credibility, right? So it's a struggle. It's a struggle. All righty. Now, as we look here, verse 15 here of chapter 12 is very close to chapter 12, verse 1. Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid. The way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise. Is that not saying, in essence, the same thing? I think it is. And I think what he's trying to do here is, again, bring up these ideas, again, trying to draw the ideas of the attitude of the fool and the attitude of those who are trying to gain wisdom. The path of the fool, the way of the fool is right in his own eyes. But if we listen to counsel, we're wise, right? So again, he's kind of maybe saying the same thing in different words to go off on another tangent or another way here. Now let's talk about some of the speeches of fools, all right? Let's see the contrast here. Let's look in verse 16 through 22. A fool's wrath is known at once, but a prudent man covers shame. He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness deceit. There's one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. The truthful lip shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counselors of peace have joy. No grave trouble will overtake the righteous, but the wicked shall be filled with evil. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but he who deals truthfully is what? Or his delight. Now notice some things here. Verse 16, a fool's wrath is known at once. Angry speech. He's upset immediately. He doesn't control himself. He doesn't check what he's saying. He lashes out in anger. He arouses contention. But the prudent man does what? He covers the shame. He doesn't spout off whatever there. He waits till he cools down before he says anything about the situation. So you have angry speech. Verse 17, perjured speech. He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness, what? Deceit. Okay, so now he's talking about a testimony in a court of law. The term righteousness here is the sense of justice. He who speaks truth declares justice. Okay, but what about a perjurer? You can't trust him, right? He's misleading the judge and is responsible for a miscarriage of justice. And again, he reveals his true character. And you remember, again, one of the commands in the Old Testament law is if you're a witness in a criminal proceeding and you tell a lie and it's found out, then what? What was the ultimate punishment? Whatever the punishment was you're trying to inflict upon the other person. You have to do it because you're lying about it. All right?
Wouldn't that be in the case of Haman, who was Mordecai? I'm trying to think. Didn't he lie on him He lied on one Mordecai.
Well, Mordecai, he didn't so much, he lied about the whole Jewish nation. He didn't really get specific to Mordecai because Mordecai, but he just took it on the whole nation. And what
Mordecai
he,
would bow down.
yeah, because he wouldn't bow down. And he said that the whole Jewish nation was a nation that was that way. And God saved the Jewish nation by putting Esther there at that moment in time.
Right.
I'm trying to think of another example where,
But the gallows that
yeah,
created for Mordecai, he ended up.
he wound up on that same gallows.
Mhm.
So in that same respect, in the Old Testament law, if you had perjured yourself to say that this person was guilty of murder, and it was found out that you told a lie, you would be found guilty and you would be taken out and stoned and killed. Boy, what would happen today if perjury was dealt with that way? Ooh, I think I'd be stopping a lot of that stuff. What do you think?
Yeah.
All right. Verse 18. There's one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. The inflammatory speech. This person is speaking recklessly. He's harming people with his words. Again, the edge of the sword is called, it's what? His mouth, right? He who speaks like the piercings of a sword. So again, the human mouth can do as much damage as a mouth of metal. Okay, but what about the tongue of the wise? The tongue of the wise promotes health. Okay, so as opposed to inflammatory speech where you're trying to stir something up, the tongues of the wise soothe injury. They undo injury. They soothe the anguish. They try to heal the wounds. Verse 19, deceitful speech. The truthful lip shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Okay, so you have the deceitful speech. Truth is consistent and invincible. It's always going to work. It's always going to be there. It endures the test of time. But for the lying tongue, it's what?
For a moment.
It's like this. It's just as quick as a wink, right? That's what he's trying to bring out there. That's the idea. It lasts as long as it takes to blink an eye. Okay, brother. All righty. Evil counsel, 20 through 22. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counselors of peace have joy. No grave trouble will overtake the righteous, but the wicked shall be filled with evil. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but he who deals truthfully, or those who deal truthfully, are his delight. So here you have the evil counsel. All right. No harm is going to befall the righteous. No grave trouble will overtake them. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. So again, he's uttered this truth before, back in chapter 6, verse 17. Remember, we talked about the 7 things that God hates. He says what? Lying lips, a lying tongue is something that God hates. He abhors, he loathes. All righty. Now, what about the speech of the wise? All right. A prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims foolishness. The hand of the diligent will rule, but the lazy man will be put to forced labor.
How do you define what's a prudent man?
A prudent man conceals knowledge.
I mean, what is it? What's the definition?
A smarter man, a wise man. And again, he's not going to tell everything he knows, right? He's going to restrain it. He's cautious. He's reserved. He's not inclined to utter unadvisedly what he knows, but waits for a fitting opportunity because of wise caution or personal humility. And again, it's those circumstances where, listen, we don't need to say and tell everybody everything we know about a person, especially whenever that person is not doing what's right. You know, we need to try to talk with them, but we need to conceal it, right? That's a prudent man. Well, what's the heart of the foolish going to do? He's going to proclaim it, and he's going to tell foolishness. He's going to add to the story and make it worse, right? He's going to embellish it. That's right. The hand of the diligent shall rule, right? But the lazy man will be put to forced labor, right? So again, strong and active individuals rise to the surface in an organization. They reach the position and they might become the employer of other people. They become the boss. Why? Because they're diligent. They're trying to do what's right. But the lazy man is going to be what? He's going to be put to forced labor. I often think about that, and I think about that a lot as I'm driving down the road and watching as I'm going down the road and watching guys work on the road. 4 or 5 will be watching, 2 or 3 guys digging. And I'm sitting there. That shovel don't fit your hand. You know what I'm trying to say? And of course, they're the bosses. They're the engineers. They're talking about what needs to be done. And it's the other guys that's down there doing the grunt work. And it's so interesting in that respect, right? It's so interesting.
You need 4 guys to watch 2 guys dig.
Yeah, 4 guys to watch 2 guys. And you've seen it too, haven't you? We've all seen it somewhere down the line. And it's amazing in that respect that, in that respect. Chapter 2, verse 12, 25. Anxiety in the heart of a man causes depression, but a good word makes it glad. Encouraging speech. Okay, sometimes what causes depression?
It could be circumstances of life or,
Right.
situations, and, some, or tragic situations, or
Right.
Some kind of, some kind of hardship. It could be a lot of things,
Right.
that can cause it.
It can cause a lot of that. But, when people dwell on their problems, when they're always thinking about their problems, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better, and you can't figure out what to do to make it any better. Those things causes, worry. That's what Jesus would call worry. That's what Jesus would call anxiety, right? You can't change it, so what good is it to worry about it? And so she's emphasizing that idea. The cares of life will bring them to despair. They want to quit. But a good word can do what? It can make a glad heart. A word of encouragement may help somebody in a time of trouble. And sometimes it's very, very simple thing, but again, how often do we not give out the good words like we know we need to? And the righteous should choose his friends carefully. The way of the wicked leads them astray. So again, the righteous is going to choose the kind of friends that's going to help him to be better. That's going to help him to be encouraged. That's going to be there whenever he needs that. He can go, and a righteous person is going to be open to the opinions for others. But again, the way of the wicked lead them astray. So what's happened? They're opinionated. They refuse advice. You've got to do it my way or the highway. And more often than not, people go the highway. And then whenever it comes time, then what happens? Nobody's there for them when they need to be there. Here's the conclusion. The lazy man does not roast when he is hunting, but its diligence is man's precious possession. In the way of righteousness is life, and in its pathway there is no death. So again, the laziness will not roast his game. He's too lazy to cook what he's captured. He goes through the thrill of the hunt, throws it away. All right. He makes no good use of it. All right. But the person that is diligent, he's going to work for it. He's going to get it and use it. Right. In the path of righteousness is life, and in its pathway there is no death. Death is the penalty for sin. Life is prolonged for the righteous because he's doing what's right. There's immortality, all right, in that respect. So think about the ideal of the gospel, how the gospel gives us light, right? All right, chapter 13. We're getting close to, we got about 10 more minutes, 10, 15 minutes. I don't know if I want to start here or not. 10, 11, 12, 3 chapters a night. Let's just stop here. Give me a chance to rest and get the rest of this taken care of, okay?
Okay.
All right, is that okay with y'all? And we'll go from here. We'll start this January the 17th? No, January the 18th.
Covering some ground.
Okay, yeah, we're covering ground, but we're not covering enough ground fast enough. You know what I'm saying? Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Yeah. And you got 31 chapters, and we're only through the 12th chapter. So, so again, I'm going to have to develop a way to do this. And I've thought about the first 6 or 7 weeks dealing with Proverbs and the last 6 weeks dealing with Ecclesiastes. I'm now thinking about doing more on Proverbs because it covers more, and maybe taking the last 4 weeks to deal with Ecclesiastes. It's only 12 chapters, but that may be the way I handle it.
Mhm.
I may have to take the bulk of the time for Proverbs.
Chapters are not very long, aren't they, in Ecclesiastes?
Some of them are, some of them aren't. That's kind of, like I said, that's kind of where I'm leaning to doing right now. So we'll go through about, the week is 13 weeks, so we go through about 2/3 of that for Proverbs, and then the last third for Ecclesiastes. I'm thinking that's what I'm going to try to do. The only other way to do Ecclesiastes is to try to gather all the Proverbs together under tongues or under, and that's the way we preach it more often than not, right? Riches, tongues, things along that line, what you could use. But I'm hoping, as you've seen through this, there's a lot more unity in the book here than just a bunch of words put together. There is a lot more unity in it.
Yeah.
And I haven't really saw that before either. So this has been very interesting to me as I'm teaching it as well. So thank you guys very much, and appreciate all that you're doing, and keep up the good work and great things that you're doing for the Lord. And I appreciate you very, very much. God bless you both.
I told the wife I was